In this week's reading, we read one of the most enigmatic stories in the Torah. It's a strange story from beginning to end. And it's something I want to discuss with you tonight, to work through it step by step and to see A, what the meaning of the story has for itself, but B, there must be something deeper to this whole episode, something that's meant to mean something in our lives. Everything in Torah has some sort of relevance, but especially when you find these really strange stories, and you know, well, this had to have happened for a very good reason. There must be something deep underlying this that animates the story and can animate our lives. Isaac is getting old, and it's time for him to pass on the baton of Jewish belief. They weren't Jews yet, but Abrahamic faith from his father, pass it on to the next generation. The way the Torah calls it, is time for him to bless his children. But blessings is what Abraham received from God. God said, I am giving you the power to bless. And Abraham gave that to Isaac, the power to bless. So it isn't just a regular blessing like I tell you, be blessed, have a wonderful day, mazel tov. These are great blessings. But they're ordinary blessings. When Isaac is coming to bless his children, there's something altogether different about that. He's passing on, handing on those powerful blessings from God to the next generation. In a sense, he is appointing an heir who is going to be the future to continue Abraham's vision of monotheism, of spreading the word of God in the world, and what is to eventually become the Jewish people. So he has two sons to choose from. They're twins. You know who they were? Jacob and Esau. Yaakov and Esau. And they were twins. Esau was the older of the twins. And we read in the portion how as they grew older, their paths started to separate. And Jacob was a wholesome person, which didn't study, is termed ishtam, can translate it wholesome, can translate it as simple, a man of simple faith. Not in a negative term, but in an uncomplex, real, sincere faith in God. And he was this, sort of perfect child, doing everything right, going along with everything. Esau, as he grew older, it became apparent he had a very different tendency and personality. He was the wild child. He was a hunter. He would deceive his father. He would, he would go out there and do his things. And it comes time, as they're growing older, to give them the blessings. Who would you bless? Who would you imagine Yitzchak would pass on these blessings to? Jacob. It's a natural continuation of that line. It belongs to Jacob, it's obvious. But we find that Isaac instead calls in Esau and says, Esau, please prepare me some food. I want to give you blessings. Of all people, he wants to bless Esau. So we're going to go get back to this in a second. All the commentaries are trying to figure out why would Isaac want to bless Esau specifically. But that's what he does. We'll still first stay the story. And Rebekah, his wife, Rivkah, overhears this conversation and says to Yaakov, to Jacob, this can't go down. She was afraid of what's going to be the future of these blessings. What's it going to do to the world if Esau gets them? And so she tells Yaakov, I need you to go to your father's room, pretend to be a brother, and get those blessings. Yitzhak was blind at this point. And if Yaakov would go in, he wouldn't necessarily know who it was. Yaakov's initial reaction as a wholesome person, a man of simple faith, he said, how can I do this to deceive my father? Instead of being blessed, I'm going to be cursed. And his mother Rebekah says, don't worry, it's on me. I have your back. She tells him, the only worry is, if your father isn't sure, he's blind, he's going to feel you. And Esau, we know, was very hairy. Yaakov had smooth skin. So what's going to happen is, if he's unsure of your identity, he's going to try feeling your arms. So she told him, she took goat skin, put it on his arms to be hairy like his brother. He has his mother's blessings, and his mother's convinced him into this, so he goes ahead. And Jacob goes into the room, and he tells his father, I'm here. His father says, who is this? And here he used a very subtle lie. He doesn't outrightly lie, but he twists words that he deceives his father. He says, it is I, Esau, your firstborn. Which of course simply means, it is I, Esau. But if you put a comma there, it is I, period, comma. Esau is your firstborn. So technically he got around, he didn't actually have to lie. But Yitzchak caught on. He says something's wrong with the way this guy's speaking. He had mentioned God's name. His voice sounded off. So Yitzchak says, it doesn't sound like Esau. It sounds like Yaakov. Let me feel you. And of course he has it all worked out. He feels his arms, they're hairy. And Yitzchak says, the arms are the arms of Esau, and the voice of Jacob. But he's convinced enough to give him the blessings. And he gives him the entire blessings. And he blesses him with the material blessings. You're going to be a master over your brother and over the world, and then later on spiritual blessings. Esau, so yeah, the blessings finish. Jacob leaves the room, happy. Plot has worked. Esau comes back from his hunting. He has his food prepared for his father. Unbeknownst to everything going on, unaware, he walks into the room. And he says, Father, I have your food for you. I'm ready for the blessings. And Yitzchak says, what? You were just here. Oh man, who would I give these blessings to? It must have been your brother came and fooled me. But he says, you know what? If he fooled me, the blessings are his. But then Esau says, Father, please, you have nothing left for me? So you bless Esau as well with secondary blessings. And Esau is distraught, upset, screams out of pain for a missed opportunity. This is, his whole life, his success, what he's envisioned for himself and his children, descendants, has just been swept away from under his feet. And Rivkah senses that it's no longer safe for Yaakov to stay around. She tells Jacob, says, run to your uncle's house, leave here, your brother wants to kill you. And that sort of ends this episode. So from beginning to end, there are inconsistencies and strange things that pop up. And the big question sort of we want to address is, number one, who was Esau and Yaakov? What do we really know about them? Number two, why would Isaac want to bless Esau and Rivkah want to bless Yaakov, Jacob? Why were they on the same page? Number three, if Rebekah really felt that Jacob deserved the blessings, why wouldn't she have a conversation with her husband about it? Why have to go through this subterfuge? Why have to go through all this deceit? Just knock on his door and say, Isaac, we have to have a chat about our kids. Something's going on, you don't realize what is up.
The blessing is generally given to the firstborn.
Yes, so Risa says, a very good point. The blessing generally is given to the firstborn. In Jewish tradition, the firstborn is awarded certain responsibilities, and by virtue of those certain rights. For example, in inheritance law, if there is no will, and the estate is divided between all the children equally, except that the firstborn gets a double portion. So if someone has 3 children, you divide the estate in 4, the firstborn gets 2 of the 4, each one of them get 1/4 each. So the same will be true of the blessings. The firstborn is the natural progenitor, the natural continuation of the parents. And therefore, he would deserve the blessings. So as you're answering why Yitzchak would want to give Esau the blessings over Jacob, he deserved them. So then the flip side of the question, why did Rebekah not go ahead with that? If Esau deserved them, how did she have a right to steal them from him? Even if she felt they don't belong in his hands and they are be squandered in his hands. Imagine you had a business deal that you made $10 million in this business deal. The money rightfully should go to you. And I decide, you know what? I don't think you're responsible enough for this money. I don't think you'll do so much good with this money. Instead, I can better allocate this money. I can handle it better. So I'm going to take the money. Even if it's true that I will do more good with this money than you would, it's irrelevant. It's your money. You made the money. So even if Jacob would do better with the blessings, they belong to Esau. So how can Rebekah just take them away from him? So along the lines, let's take this track, the firstborn track. There's an episode which precedes this episode, which is important here. And that is, Abraham dies. And they're sitting Shiva at the home. One of the foods traditional for Shiva is lentil soup. Lentils are round, cycle of life. So Jacob's cooking lentil soup. And Esau comes home from a hunt, starving, hungry. He says, give me some soup. Jacob says, oh, not so fast. You want some of this soup? You pay for it. And Esau is, I'll pay whatever I want. Whatever you want, I'll pay. So Jacob tells him, you know what? Sell me your birthright. Your firstborn right, sell to me, and I'll give you soup. He says, take it. What do I need this for? And he sells it to him. It's not clear, what did he sell him? What's the birthright? Well, it may be a blessing. It may be financial rights to inheritance. Or according to some commentaries, it's the rights to serve in the temple, which originally was reserved for the firstborns. But to some degree, Jacob has acquired the rights to the firstbornhood, if that's a word. He now, although he's the secondborn, he has the legal status to a degree as a firstborn. So then, it would follow that he has rights to these blessings. Do Isaac and Rebekah know about this deal? If they know about the deal, then Isaac wouldn't want to bless Esau. He should go for Jacob. He's the firstborn. If they don't know about it, then the question goes back. Why did Rebekah think to give to Jacob? And if only Rebekah knew about it, not Isaac, why wouldn't she tell him? Right? So, the truth is, if we look through carefully at the Chumash, you go through the story by story, and we try to analyze the characters. Who are these two kids, or young adults? Esau and Jacob. We get a very different picture than what tradition paints. And afterwards, you go home, check this out. If you have a Chumash, you can read through it online. And try, just from the simple text, figure out Esau's character. You'll be challenged to find too much bad. He gets a really bad rap in tradition. But you look at the actual text, it doesn't seem like such a bad guy. Now the Midrash says terrible things about Esau, and it's alluded to in the verse. It doesn't make it up out of thin air. There are, allusions here and there which paint a picture. But ultimately Esau seems to be just a wild child, someone who's a little different. And the Midrash gives him a really hard time. It says, for example, on that day when he came to get the soup, he was out murdering and raping people, and he says, now, there are scriptural inferences from the wording used that he was out playing in the field. That same expression is used regarding murder somewhere in the Bible, regarding rape somewhere in the Bible, and so the Midrash says the reason that word is used in this context is to allude that Esau is out doing these things. This is all midrashic interpretation. The simple reading of the verse doesn't say that, which means on a simple level, Torah doesn't necessarily want us to think that way, although it does want us to think that way a little deeper. But it doesn't outrightly say it. And I think there's a reason for that. on a simple level, what Esau seems to be is that child that doesn't fit in. You know, you have parents that have visions and dreams for their children. And sometimes their child, the character, their personality, the direction in life doesn't fit the way the parents, envision them. The apple fell a little far from the tree. And it's always very challenging for a parent what to do in that situation. Naturally, we want to sort of mold our children in a certain way. Naturally, I want to see them go in the path that I've been going, or even a little broader, the vision that I've envisioned for their life. But sometimes you have to let go a little and say, this child needs something different. The guy once came to a rabbi and says, Rabbi, I don't get it. I have 8 children. And his youngest had just sort of veered off the path. He was an observant Jew, had rebelled against his parents, and says, 7 of my children are perfect children, doing everything I brought them up with. This 8th child, I did everything the exact same way to the other children. I treated him the same way. In our house, everything was the same. And what happened to him? He's rebelled against the heritage of his fathers. But I told him, you answer the question yourself. You did everything the same as you did for the other children. Every child needs something different. If you're going to treat every child the same way, put them in a cookie cutter, in a mold, they're going to rebel against it. And so when you have a child that doesn't fit in, the challenge of the parents is to be able to create the space to A, appreciate that child for who they are, but B, to nurture them on their level, to be able to see what they need different to other children, to see how to channel whatever energies they have in a positive way. And this is very challenging. Or take a classroom. There are kids who don't do well in school, not because they're bad kids. Often they become bad kids because schools don't do them justice. But they need something different. And sitting in a classroom with a teacher standing in front is not working for them. And so they mess up, they misbehave, they get something violent. And if that cycle continues, they end up, going in a bad direction in life. But all they needed was a teacher to realize they're different and to give them that different attention, different learning style, treat them with the love and nurture they needed. And they could have blossomed into a beautiful child, maybe better than different, creative people that think differently. And so let's picture Esau, this kind of kid. He didn't fit into the mold of Isaac and Rebekah, holy people who were brought up and lived their lives devoted to God. And Esau was a different kind of kid. Didn't quite fit in to that mold. Now, the Midrash is also true. Because it didn't fit in, what happens to a child that doesn't fit in? They naturally go and rebel. And so because Esau was a different kind of kid to what his parents may have expected, he went off and did his thing. He was a violent murderer, perhaps. He was a rapist. He was someone who was out there in the world looking for power, looking for pleasure, because that's how he found self-expression. That's how he found a realization of self he didn't find in the way his parents were bringing him up. So now that we've painted that picture, let's look at what Isaac and Rebekah's reactions may have been. Now, to say Isaac, some commentaries say that Isaac was blind and was only unaware of what's going on. So he was fooled by Esau to think Esau was a beautiful character. Esau would ask him questions in Jewish law to convince him that he's a very studious and devout child. But it's hard to say that Isaac, one of our forefathers, was so easily swayed and convinced by Esau. Especially since in the portion later on, we read that he's disappointed with Esau's choice of wives because they were serving idols. So he knew that Esau up to something. So to say that he was so naive to think Esau was a good kid sounds a little need some more, something more there. So here's what may have been the debate in their house between Isaac and Rebekah. Even though they didn't speak about it, we'll get to that in a second, why they wouldn't have spoken about it. But the silent debate. Isaac thinks to himself, Esau, he's a child that needs help. He can do amazing things. He has a spirit and an energy that is wild. He has he can, if he is channeled in the right direction, it can be incredible what he can achieve. He can change the world. Jacob is a great kid. He's going to do really well in life. But he doesn't have that energy, that spark, that power that Esau has. So if I can channel Esau in a good direction, that is going to make it change the world. After all, Abraham, his vision was to change the world. With his idea of belief in God, he had an idea to create a spiritual consciousness in the world. And to that end, he preached recognition of God. He did the mitzvahs. And that is what he gave over to his children and children's children. It's what Judaism is today. What's the Jewish mission? What's all the mitzvahs? They aren't just, live a certain lifestyle to be part of a Jewish community. This is a culture which you belong to. That's not the Jewish mission.
To make the world a better place.
To make the world a better place. We are trying to create a revolution. A spiritual revolution that trickles down into a material revolution. We can make the world into a place with a divine consciousness, where there's awareness of the truth of reality creation, which in turn brings to a world of peace, brings to a world where people live for the right cause, for a higher reason. So to really change the world, create the revolution, Isaac said, you know who can do that? Esau. He has the potential to really bring about this revolution in the world. And Rivkah, she may have saw it as well, but she said, it's dangerous. What if he doesn't turn around? What if the blessings don't channel him in the right direction? Then you're giving all the material success, the blessings for power and dominion, in the hands of someone who can do very evil things with it. Diplomatically, you have this challenge as well sometimes. When you have a regime which is, doing terrible things, and there's this constant tension, and it becomes very political, how do we respond? Right? Take America. How does America respond to Cuba? How does America respond to Iran? And there's two legitimate sides of the debate. Right? Not to get political here, just speaking theoretically. One side is you put sanctions on them. You go harsh. You have to shut them down. Right? That was sort of Rebekah's thinking. Esau, I can't give him anything. I have to just try and make sure he doesn't gain power. The other way of looking at it is, let's become friends with them. Open diplomatic ties. Give them perhaps something, and that might bring them around to become more friendly with us, to become more civilized, more democratic. And that was sort of the debate going on between Isaac and Rebekah. And the debate goes on until today. Isaac felt giving the blessings to Esau is going to give him that support that's going to channel his wild energies in a very positive direction. And Rivkah thought it might work, but if it doesn't, we're in deep danger. All of history is going to be impacted, that the eternal blessings for rulership, for dominion, for power is given in the hands of the tyrants, in the hands of Esau and his descendants. And she felt, I have to do something about it. I can't allow even the possibility of this happening. The blessings must go to Jacob. did she do the right thing? We know the story. Jacob stole the blessings. The question is, we read the text, is there indication in the text, one way or another, whether what Rebekah and Jacob did was okay, was good, or they stole the blessings, but it was frowned upon? What do you think? Forget the text for a second. Do you think in the bigger picture, Rebekah and Jacob were sanctioned for what they did, or they did the right thing? The right thing. Everyone, do you think the right thing? So, you're saying, and I'm not saying this is wrong or right, you're saying that deceit and almost lying is okay because the means justify the end.
In this case,
I think about it as you mentioned, kind of in the loaded in the Russian roulette sense. You've got one cartridge in the gun. There's a 1 in 6 chance of something absolutely horrible happening when you pull that trigger. In other words, there's a pretty significant chance of something absolutely horrible happening. So you have to be risk averse.
Okay. So the risk was that high that it okayed deceit.
Yes.
Okay. So the commentaries are divided on this. Definitely, for the most part, we are the heirs of Jacob. So definitely, we look favorably of what he did. We, the Jewish people, are here because of what happened then. Right? You know, history is always written by the victors. No, but for the most part, obviously, Jacob was a forefather. He was a holy person. Rebekah was one of the matriarchs. And we look what they did favorably. She did the right thing. She was driven by a prophecy that she knew Jacob was destined to be the next, the father of the Jewish people. And we'll get to that in a second, the prophecy. But there are indications in the text that Jacob was punished for this as well. And I'll give you a few examples of the indications. Number one, Jacob runs to Laban's house, his uncle, Laban. And he meets his cousin, Rachel, and he wants to marry her. A beautiful girl. And he arranges with Laban, I'm marrying this girl, your daughter. Comes to the wedding, and he doesn't realize she's switched for a sister, Leah. Right? And by the time he realizes it's too late, the marriage has been consummated. And he comes the next morning to his father-in-law. He says, what have you done to me? You fooled me. And his father-in-law tells him, we don't do that here to give the younger before the older. Leah was the older daughter. He says the older has to get married first. Now, some commentaries point out this is a subtle rebuke that Laban is telling Jacob. You, the younger, stole the blessings of the older. We don't do that here to give the younger before the older. A subtle rebuke that he's punished. He gets the wrong wife, sort of as a midah keneged midah, as tit for tat for what he did. A second example is Jacob suffers later in his life, where his prized son Joseph is kidnapped by his brothers and sold down to Egypt. He doesn't know the fate. The brothers tell their father, Jacob, Joseph has been killed by wild animals. And they show him, they take a goat, they slaughter a goat, take its blood, put it on Joseph's tunic, and show it to Jacob. The same goat that he took to use as the sleeves to fool his father. His sons then took a goat to fool him. So again, some commentaries see this, that the reason Jacob suffered through this with Joseph for 20 years is to some degree a punishment for what he did to his father earlier. Then one last example, which goes way further in history. When Esau finds out that he missed out on the opportunity for blessings, the Torah uses a term, he cried out. I'll tell you the exact terminology. When Esau hears, "Vayitzak tza'aka gedola umara," he screamed a very bitter and great scream, a great cry. That exact terminology, tza'aka gedola umara, is used in the Megillah. When we read the story of Esther and Mordechai and Purim, when Mordechai finds out about a decree from Achashverosh and Haman to annihilate the Jewish people, Vayitzak tza'aka gedola umara. And the commentaries point out that cry of Mordechai, the Jewish people later in history, is a quote-unquote punishment reflection of the cry of Esau. That Esau sort of had the last laugh. Well, didn't actually have the last laugh, but Esau would have his turn to inflict that pain on the Jewish people. So these all indicate that Jacob did something wrong. Now, they're not mutually exclusive.
But Esau sold it to Jacob, so by right it should be Jacob's, huh?
Well, two things. Number one, it's not clear exactly what he sold. When I sell you something, for example, let's imagine I owned a house. And I sell you the house. And then on the property, you dig up and you find a treasure, which my grandfather owned the house earlier had dug there. Who owns the treasure now?
The person that buys the house.
I never sold you the treasure. I sold you the house.
That was part of the house.
Okay, so in the case of a house, it could very well be that way because I give you the deed. The land becomes yours. But let's say something less broad that I sell you. This case happened, for example, someone bought a table on Craigslist. And they come home, and in the drawer they find $10,000. Who owns $10,000 now? Let's say the original owner accidentally left his savings in the drawer and forgot to take it out when he sold the table. Who legally does the money belong to? It's a good question, right? I sold you a table. I didn't tell you what the contents of the drawer. So we can debate it. The same thing here. When Esau sold his birthright, he may not know the implications towards the blessings. So did he sell that to Jacob as well? Or did he sell only the financial gains of the birthright? Or only the service in the temple? It's not clear what he sold to Jacob in the birthright. That's A. B, even if it were to be true that Jacob had legal rights, he deceived his father. If not outwardly lying to his father, he definitely deceived him. And that in itself is a sin. Disrespect. So the two ways of thinking are not mutually exclusive. It could be that it was the right thing to do, but it came at a cost of doing something wrong. Right? So he deserves punishment, quote unquote, or he sinned, but ultimately in the bigger picture it was necessary. So it was the lesser of the two evils in that sense. Or it could be that there's two ways of looking at the story. But the last question we're left to really answer is, why didn't Rebecca tell Isaac about this? If she felt so strongly, why did she have to go through this deceit? Why did she have to go through this process? Have a conversation with Isaac, let him know what's going on. So, how did she know more than Isaac knew about Jacob and Esau? We're told in the beginning of the portion that when she was pregnant, she had difficulties in her pregnancy. She felt something strange going on inside of her, and she went to a prophet, the priest, the prophet, to ask him what's going on. And he told her that you have two nations inside of you that are going to be constantly at war with each other, constant tension between them, and that's why you're feeling something, uncomfortable going on inside. Now, so she knew that there's going to be Yaakov is going to be the one nation of good, of the Jewish people, spreading light in the world, and Esau, the evil or materialists or whatever force of negativity is going to come out of that. And she knew that from that prophecy she heard from Shem. So now when her children were growing up, she saw distinctly where Jacob belonged, where Esau belonged. Isaac didn't necessarily know that prophecy. And some commentaries say she never told him because she felt almost embarrassed that she went to someone else instead of her husband Isaac to ask what's going on. She received this prophecy without Isaac knowing. She always felt awkward about it. She never told him how I know our children's destiny. And so she couldn't have a conversation with Isaac and bring it up now, 15 years later. By the way, I never told you this. When I was pregnant, really? Our kids, you found out and you never told me? So she couldn't bring it up with him. That's some commentaries say. Others say she didn't think she'd convince him. So she'd rather, once she has an argument with him and she can't convince him, she can't go and deceive him. He knows she's up to something. He's going to be very cautious. So she'd rather, instead of trying to have it out with him, just go originally with deceit. But I think there's something deeper here. And there's a beautiful interpretation from one of the Hasidic greats in his work called the Chidushei Harim. His name was Yitzchak Meir. So Rim Rebbe Yitzchak Meir. He was the first Ger Rebbe of the Ger dynasty, which is one of the largest Hasidic groups in Israel. And he says something fascinating. And this goes to the heart of what the story means to us. We all have an Esau and a Jacob. Especially as Jews, we have a soul inside of us that's yearning for spirituality, yearning for a life of meaning, purpose, that wants to give, that wants to live for something greater, connect to God. We have a soul. The Jacob. That, perfect, simplistic truth that lives inside of us. And then we have the Esau. Esau in the Talmud is seen to be the father of Rome. Rome was, deeply invested in materialism. Rome was a society which was, maybe the father of the Western world to a degree, where material success was seen to be the ultimate of achievement. And we have that Esau, that ego, the drives that we have that are leading us just to feed our own sense of self-respect, our own achievements of success in the world. Sometimes lead us to do bad things for our own personal gain over others. That's the Esau. And we live in this constant tension between the two sides of us. Often the Esau wins, and we're Esau people. Maybe more often than not.
Than we would wish.
What?
More often than we would wish.
More often than we wish. And sometimes the Yaakov inside of us, the Jacob, rears its beautiful head, and we have inspired moments where we're altruistic. We go out away from another, where we connect and have a spiritual experience. And we have that tension constantly going on. Rebecca thought to herself like this: if I convince Isaac to give the blessings to Jacob, he's going to bless Jacob because Jacob, who he is, the spiritual, perfect person. And when that trickles down in history, who's going to be the heir to those blessings? Only those people that can live up to the Jacob. That full, perfect human being. That tzaddik. The fully righteous person who is the Jacob in his generation. That's who sort of the blessing would belong to. That's who they'd be appropriate for. That's who Isaac gave it to. The opposite, to give him to Esau, is blessing our egos, is just going to feed the materialists in us. So she wanted to know how this is going to impact history, how later generations are going to gain from this blessing. And this was her plan. If Isaac thinks of giving the blessings to Esau, which means you have a Jacob who's dressed in the garments of Esau, that is a prototype for his descendants who are going to live in future generations. That's us. We have the garments of Esau. We're living in a material world, and often that side of ourselves gets the better of us. Our bodies, our lives that we live, the Esau we're invested in. That's the garments we cover our hands with. And you feel us, that's who you experience. But the voice is still a voice of Jacob. There's the way we sometimes pray, we study. Inside of us, there's a burning flame of purpose. There's a soul. So we are the Jacob dressed in the clothes of Esau. And Rivkah said, that's who I want to feed. That's a real Jew. Ultimately, the Jacob is the real person. Esau's only the clothing. But because Isaac was giving the blessings to this figure, which symbolized the Jewish people that are going to come later in history, the imperfect person, the me, the you. When Isaac gives a blessing, that's going to empower us whenever we live. We are now empowered with the blessings that Isaac gave because we're also deserving of those blessings. Yes, we have the clothing of Esau. So what? So did Jacob in that moment. And so Rebekah felt, I am serving the purpose of history by not convincing Isaac to give blessings to Jacob, but rather having Jacob dress up to be an Esau. Because that is who his children are going to be, for better or for worse. And so we look at ourselves, and it's important that we're self-aware, that we know our strengths and our weaknesses, our Isaacs, so our Jacobs and our Esau's, what part of ourselves is coming from the soul, from a yearning of spiritual nourishment, from a desire to do good, and what drives and behaviors and actions are coming from the Esau. It's important to recognize in ourselves who they are, and not to be fooled into thinking one way or other. To think, well, I really think this I'm motivated by good. Sometimes people believe that certain behaviors of theirs are motivated by good, not knowing that it's just the ego feeding off itself. And sometimes the opposite. I have this drive which feels to me negative. I don't like it. It's not, I don't feel it's me. But really it's coming from a very deep place of good. So it's important to recognize each thing for itself. And to also see the benefit in the Esau. Right? We said that when Isaac gave the blessings to Esau, it may have worked out really well. There was a chance they could channel him for good. So to see in yourself, not to ignore the material concerns, not to run away from success in life, but to see, can I channel those things to bring positive change in the world? If someone's a very successful businessman, they can have a lot of influence. They, of course, give their money to charity. Of course, they can, have more time in their life to dedicate to good things, to study, dedicate to their children, their family. But also they can have more influence because of their position of power and change the world for good. Often when reporters would come to the Rebbe for blessings, he would tell them, you know how much power you have? People read your articles, you sway people's opinion. Make sure you use it for good. Which was crazy. You're not just a reporter making money. You're in a position where you can empower and make a radical change of good in the world. So if you're very careful in what you write, don't just write pieces that are going to get a lot of clicks. The power you have in your hand, utilize it to make positive change, to be a part of the revolution of good in the world. And that's the Esau. We have things in our life that aren't necessarily holy, which are perhaps our jobs, our friends and social circles. They're not holy. Maybe to the degree they're self-serving, but we can channel them for good. There are ways we can channel them for more good than our Jacob side can do on its own. Because they're the parts of ourselves that are actually integrated with the world and can make the biggest change in the world. But ultimately we have to also realize that the true self is the Jacob. And any Esau we have is just a clothing we're wearing. And often we don't realize this, it doesn't express itself, but in inspired moments it does. And there are plenty of stories of Jews who lived perhaps secular lives, even with anti-religious sentiments for a great period and portion of their lives, but something happened. Push came to shove, and they stood strong for being a Jew and refused to renounce their faith and became religious or whatever it may be. And these stories just prove how no matter how deep the clothing is, the real person was always the Jacob. And the power that we have to live that Jacob, to be that Jacob beneath the clothing of Esau, comes from the blessings of Isaac. And if Rebekah wouldn't have done this, then we'd have to sort of make a choice. Are you an Esau or a Jacob? If you're a full Jacob, get the blessings of Jacob. If not, Esau. Rebekah realized that's not attainable for most of us. That's not real. It's not authentic. We'd be fooling ourselves to think that way. But we are still a Jacob, even though we live in the clothing of Esau. And so, what we can learn from this episode, this story, and I'll break it down into two main points. Number one is to recognize in ourselves what's coming from ego, what's the Esau, and what is being driven by a soul, by something larger than ourselves. Number two is each of these, we have direction in how to, those parts of our lives, how to develop. In the material side, the ego side, we shouldn't ignore it entirely. It can be channeled. Not always are we successful in channeling it, but realize that it can be channeled and we can do so much good, more good with that, with our ego. We can actually use that to sway people to make a real change in the world. The other side, things that are motivated by good, to nurture the Jacob inside of us, allow it to express itself, find opportunities that will give Jacob a voice. So the more opportunity we find for prayer, the more opportunity we find for a mitzvah, we're giving expression to the Jacob, and we're nurturing our core self and realizing that beneath the clothing of Esau that we wear, we're really a Jacob. We're a wholesome person, ishtam, a person of simple faith. We have very deep-seated connection to God. And the blessings of Isaac empower us that we develop that and nurture that in ourselves, and in turn nurture that in other people as well. See in them, beneath the veneer of, rough Esau. Sometimes you see people, look beneath, these people they're selfish, and this person is aggressive. Look at their story. Look beneath that external layer. And often you'll see a Jacob under there, a beautiful, pure soul, that for some reason is expressing itself in these negative tendencies because of maybe what they've gone through in life, because of their insecurities. So realize, just like you, beneath your clothing of Esau, is a beautiful Jacob. When you meet someone else, so the more you nurture your Jacob, the more you'll be able to see in other people beneath their Esau and see their Jacob. And you'll be able to respect people for who they really are and give them the attention. And when you do that, it encourages them to develop their Jacob. And they see themselves suddenly not as a victim, suddenly not as someone who's aggressive, but they're able to become more wholesome people because you have given them that respect. You have given them that time of day. You've seen past their imperfections, helps them see past their imperfections. And so that's a lesson we can learn from this week's Torah portion. Jacob, Esau, we learn from Isaac and Rebekah's perspectives towards them. Any questions, comments, disagreements?
I'm sorry. As an aside, I was thinking, how old did Abraham live to be?
Abraham lived to 175.
And people lived longer lives before the flood.
This is after the flood. Abraham lived after the flood. Before the flood, people lived, up to 900 odd years. And then slowly started decreasing until Moshe lived 120 years, and that sort of became the golden standard of maximum life. We wish people to live to 120. That now is sort of the goal we're trying to reach until science breaks that probably pretty soon.
That a year was 365 days then?
We assume so. I mean, it's a discussion for itself, these long lives that they live, and in the commentaries there's different angles. But definitely later in the Torah, the same text, a year is 365 days, because we have the dates of the 12 months and the dates in the calendar of the holidays that are set.
Right.
So it'd be strange that the same text calls a year earlier something different in the same Torah text. So we assume that also in the beginning, the year is the exact same years as towards the end of the Torah.